Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are diving into what I like to call nature's ultimate comeback story. We're going to discover how incredible structured order can somehow rise up from total ruin. It's a fascinating biological concept that perfectly illustrates resilience, recovery, and a sense of divine order. I want you to start by picturing a landscape completely decimated by disaster. Just close your eyes and imagine a raging wildfire that turns this lush, green forest into an endless sea of black ash. Or picture a massive volcanic eruption pouring scorching, molten lava over the earth and burying literally everything in its path under thick, heavy rock. Looking at all that devastation, what happens next? Does life simply end after a disaster like that? It's really easy to look at that ruin and think it's just a permanent graveyard. But actually, nature has this built-in blueprint for recovery, and it is absolutely spectacular. So does life simply end? The answer is a massive, resounding no. Life doesn't end. It rebuilds. And it does so through a process known as succession. This is the natural process of change in ecosystems over time, leading to more and more complex communities. Ecosystems, you see, are not static at all. They aren't frozen in time. They grow, they change, and most importantly, they recover. Succession is this orderly, completely predictable sequence of events where a destroyed habitat slowly but surely transforms back into a thriving ecosystem. Now, according to the source material, this beautifully organized process in nature points to something a bit deeper, which is captured in Ecclesiastes 3:11. It says, "He has made everything beautiful in its time." The text suggests that the scientific concept of succession perfectly reflects a divine restoring power. When we look at how ecosystems recover step by step, we're really witnessing this profound sense of order. It doesn't happen overnight, obviously, but in its time, the barren wasteland gets completely replaced by something intricate, vibrant, and incredibly beautiful. So let's look at exactly how this happens. All right, let's start with stage 1, primary succession, starting from bare rock. Imagine a brand newly formed volcanic island where the lava has just cooled and there is nothing but unforgiving bare rock. There's absolutely no soil. Zero. So to survive, nature sends in the unsung heroes of the ecosystem, pioneer species. These are the very first organisms, think lichens and mosses, that arrive in this lifeless place. They are tough, resilient little trailblazers. As they grow on the rock, they secrete these special acids that literally break the rock down. And when these pioneer species eventually die and decay, their organic matter mixes with those tiny rock fragments. Miraculously, they create the very first super thin layer of usable soil. And that kicks off a very long chronological journey. First, the volcano cools to solid rock. Then, our pioneer mosses and lichens grow and create that crucial starter soil. Once there's just a little bit of soil, grasses and tiny weeds can finally take root. As those grasses grow and die, they add even more nutrients to the soil, making it deeper, making it richer. Then come the shrubs, then the small trees, and finally the large trees and the animals return. So you go from cold lava to a vibrant, complex community. It takes a really, really long time, but the progression is completely relentless. Which brings us to part 2, secondary succession, a quick recovery. So what happens if an ecosystem doesn't have to start from absolute zero? If a massive disturbance like a fire, a hurricane, or even human land clearing happens, but the crucial, life-giving soil is actually left intact, well, you get secondary succession. Primary succession starts from bare rock with absolutely no soil, which makes it a painstakingly slow process. But because secondary succession happens where the soil already exists and it's harboring seeds and nutrients, nature gets a really powerful head start. Because of that, the recovery here is much, much faster. You can actually see real-world applications of this everywhere. If a volcano erupts, the foundation is lava rock, right? So mosses must painstakingly become trees over a super long period. But in a burned forest, sure, the trees are gone, but the soil remains. That allows grasses to rapidly sprout right from the ash and eventually become a whole new forest. The exact same thing goes for a flooded field on a farm. The soil is already there, so weeds quickly take over, and they eventually grow into a meadow or even return to a forest. Whether nature is forced into a slow rebuild or given the chance for a fast recovery, it always finds a way to return to balance. The finish line of all this rebuilding is what scientists call the climax community. This is the final stable stage of an ecosystem, completely filled with complex plants and animals. When an ecosystem reaches this stage, it basically stops drastically changing. It's found its balance. It's lush, it's stable, and it is the ultimate goal of succession, reflecting this magnificent restoration of perfect order from the chaos of a disaster. Now, you might be wondering, why does all of this actually matter to us? Well, understanding succession reveals nature's incredible resilience and, as the source points out, a restoring power in the world around us. Practically speaking, it also helps us care for the land a lot more wisely after disasters. We know we shouldn't just pave over a burned forest, right? Because we understand nature is already working behind the scenes to rebuild it. And finally, it explains long-term environmental changes, which helps us read the history of a landscape just by looking at the types of plants growing there. Okay, the source material pauses here for a quick knowledge check. Let's recap. We've seen that the main difference between primary and secondary succession really comes down to the soil. We know the vital role of pioneer species as those tough trailblazers that break down the bare rock. We know succession is super important for ecosystem recovery and land management. We know a climax community is the stable, final stage of recovery. And we've seen how the text ties all of this into the purposeful, beautiful timing of God's restoration. Moving into Section 3, Growing Well, Education Rooted in Morality. Here, the source material takes a really interesting pivot from the foundations of ecology over to personal growth. The curriculum presents a pretty bold foundational philosophy. Education without morality will hurt. They draw a really direct parallel here. Trying to grow a brilliant, educated mind without a solid moral foundation is exactly like trying to grow a massive oak tree on bare, cold, volcanic rock. Without the rich soil of biblical morality, the curriculum argues knowledge alone has no roots. It has absolutely nothing to anchor it, and ultimately, it's going to cause harm rather than bring forth life. Which brings up a critical question posed by the text. Ask yourself this. What is the point of being smart and supposedly educated if it just leads to choices that hurt ourselves and the people around us? The curriculum asserts that, look, you can have all the scientific knowledge in the world, you can memorize every single stage of succession, but if your life is missing a moral compass, that intelligence just isn't being used for its true purpose. True intelligence and a genuinely successful life absolutely require the rich soil of a moral foundation to guide your decisions. The source makes the case that when education intertwines with morality, you essentially reach what might be called a climax community of the soul. You reach a state of true stability and flourishing. Drawing from Romans 8:6-7, the text notes a promise of profound peace of mind to everyone who keeps their mind spiritual. That represents an order and a stability that outlasts absolutely any of life's unpredictable disasters. The curriculum leaves its students with a final, really provocative thought. Just as nature brilliantly and predictably rebuilds from ruin by establishing a foundation of soil first, the text asks, will you choose to build your brilliant mind on the unshakable foundation of godly morality? It's a really powerful framework linking ecological recovery to spiritual grounding, suggesting that when true education is combined with that strong foundation, there is just no limit to how beautifully you can grow. Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer. Keep building that foundation, and I will see you next time.